Hello, let's talk about books. Specifically, let's talk about these books. Do a thumbnail. Will that do? I hope it will do. I hope it will do. Let's talk about these books. Hello, my name is Elizabeth and I use these 5 reads episodes to talk about 5 books that I have read recently. First one is Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. The call number on this one is, Dewey Decimal call number is 658.4038, which is knowledge management under the broader category of technology and application of knowledge. It's basically a how to life, how to productivity book. Everyone's been talking about it. It's a genre that I really enjoy reading. And this one, it wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It was essentially put all your information in a bucket and then search it up later. So I think it's aimed at people who think of their digital information like you've put it in a filing cabinet and it can only live in that cabinet. But the advantage of digital information is you can just use search keywords in whatever system you use to capture your digital information. I use Notion at the moment, but previously I've used OneNote and Evernote and just like a jumble of files. And so this is a bit of a system for sorting that out, making it usable. I didn't take much away from it, except she did explain a concept called PARA, P-A-R-A, which is just released a whole new book about that is about organizing your files, which didn't really appeal to me. But the thing that did appeal to me was, so for example, you've saved an article on the web. When you come back to it, write a summary on the top. So like not the first time you save it, but if you find that you need to come back to it, write a little summary at the top of the page of what this article is about. And then the next time you come back to it, if you come back to it, highlight that summary to pick out 1 or 2 sentences that's the TLDR of the article, so that if you need to come back to this info, you've got the TLDR right there. You can see if it's usable for the stuff that you're doing, which makes sense in, for example, the way that I think of it is applicable to academia. So if you come back to a document that you saved 5-10 years ago and all of a sudden it's relevant to your research interests right now, you've got the TLDR right there, which is like the abstract but even more condensed. That's the only thing I took away from this book. If you're not interested in how to productivity, skip it. Skip it entirely. It wasn't anything groundbreaking or earth-shattering, unless you really are starting from scratch and need to build a system, in which this is a perfectly cromulent system. Oh, I should tell you, Building a Second Brain was published in 2022. Next, we have Proust and the Squid, The Story and Science of the Reading Brain by Maryanne Wolf. The call number on this one is 418.4019, which is language, psychological principles of reading. This one's pretty old now. It came out in 2007. And I know that she has really, my cat's just getting comfy on the beanbag over there. She's released something more recently, which is about reading in a digital age. It's probably called, I think it's called Reader Come Home. And Maryanne Wolf is a researcher on dyslexia and reading disabilities in children. This was interesting in that it talked about how humans acquire reading skill, because it's not something that we are genetically programmed to do. We can recognize symbols, we can talk, but taking words, assigning symbols to them, and then learning how to reinterpret them as reading for every single human is something that every single human has to learn. And of course, not everybody can do that because not every brain is the same. So that was fascinating. I learned some things like the way that pathways form in your brain changes depending on the style of alphabet that you learn. So me learning English, I have different neural pathways to somebody who learns Chinese because that's a different style of alphabet, which was freaking fascinating. And also the way that dyslexia and other reading disabilities present in the brain, in the neural pathways, is different depending on the alphabet that you're struggling to recognize. That's cool. That's so cool. Lots of it was about how dyslexia works and how they measure all this stuff in your brain, and I just skipped that. In fact, it literally said, the next part is deep dive science. You can skip this if you want. So I did. Really interesting. Would I read it again? No. It got the job done. I was reading this for the 400 category for Kelly at Curatorially Yours' Dewey Decimal Challenge of this year, and that fit my 400, which is why I read it, but I'm glad I read it nonetheless. We all like to learn things. Next, I read Miracles of Our Own Making, A History of Paganism by Liz Williams. The call number here is 299.94, which is clearly the 200s is religion, and the 29s is other religions, which paganism is. This is a book that I bought myself for Christmas in 2022, so I'm excited to have read it. It was really good. I enjoyed reading about the history of pagan religions because so much of it is made up. So much of it tries to retcon an ancient history that it does not have. It's all relatively recent, and when I say relatively recent, I would say like the Victorian period onward. They embraced the vibes and they made it up as they went, and they tried to give it an ancient past, but it's all new. And I love that because it doesn't diminish from the religions or your belief in those religions. And I think it's cool to accept that, yeah, it's new, but we dig it. Does that make sense? Because I've said in a previous video, I was really interested in Wicca when I was a teenager, but it always felt a bit wanky and pretentious and middle class, and it is, and it's really nice to read where those ideas have come from, who's perpetuating those ideas, why I feel that way about it, and just place it in the broader scheme. That's why I like history. Place things in the broader scheme of human culture. So this it covered Druidism. The author is a Druid herself. Paganism in both the UK and the US because, Wicca in both the UK and the US because they have manifested differently, like all religious branches do. There's Satanism. Was there shamanism? A little bit. Anglo-Saxons and ancient Druids and that sort of thing to provide a context for the modern situation. If you're interested in the history of paganism, this is well worth a read. I really enjoyed it, but I understand not everybody is into this niche subject like I am. This one was published in 2020. Next is one I read on my Kindle, and that is How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. I have been reading this since September 2022, so that's 12 months ago-ish. And it started off, I happened to be in the car waiting for my kid to come out of an appointment, and so I just ended up reading it every time I was waiting for my kid to come out of an appointment because it was definitely something that you could just read in bite-sized chunks. How to Read a Book. The call number is 028. The revised edition came out in 1972. It was originally published in the 40s, so the language is really dated, but the concepts, I think, are pretty consistent. It's definitely something that I would give an undergrad starting out. It's how to critically think about what you're reading. What is the author trying to say? What are you getting from the argument? And then once you've learned how to read, how to synthesize your reading. So when you're writing an essay at uni, for example, you don't just rely on one source. You have a question that needs to be answered and you pull sources from everywhere and you compare them against each other. That's what this book is trying to say. So I didn't learn anything in the sense that I know how to read in the way that they've set out in this book, but I didn't know the language and the explanation to give it. Just like grammar, explaining grammar is so hard for me because I grew up in a time where grammar rules weren't explained to you, you just intuited them. And so trying to explain grammar to somebody else and the function of something in a sentence is difficult for me because I don't have that vocabulary. Same with this book. I can do all the things in here. It's given me a vocabulary to explain how to do that thing, which might be useful when my kid's in undergrad in a couple of years. We will see. Would I recommend it? Probably no. Out of interest maybe, but not out of everyday usefulness. And finally, I have this nice, thick, although not particularly heavy book, The Library: A Fragile History by Andrew Pettegree and Arthur de Wedumen, who I didn't learn how to pronounce that person's name at all. I've been talking about this book since I got it for Christmas last year. The call number is 027.09, which I reckon is the history of libraries or information management. I read it on my Kindle, as you might know if you watched my August haul, because I was on holiday. Is it holiday reading? I would say yes. This one was published in 2021. It is in paperback now if you want to grab something a little more user-friendly. So this one frames the history of libraries, starting from the Great Library of Alexandria through to the recreating of the Great Library of Alexandria and the way that libraries have ebbed and flowed over time, what they looked like. And the biggest thing I took away from this is actually really comforting to me. Libraries arose and were spectacular because of the person who was doing the collecting. And once the person who was doing the collecting died, their descendants, their inheritors did not give two shits about what was in the library. And I think I've always said to my family, like, put these in the bin. Take them to the secondhand bookshop. They're not going to want my beautiful collection that I invest a lot of time and brings me a lot of joy. They don't want it. And that's how libraries historically have always been. Once again, placing myself in this broader historical context just brings me comfort. That's why I studied history, to place myself in the broader context. So that's what I took away from this book. But also very interesting to read about public libraries and the challenges of getting public libraries as we know them today off the ground. It took a really long time to develop the public library where you can come in and borrow books for free or for a minimal fee, because they competed a lot with subscription libraries. Kindle Unlimited is one that I subscribe to. And when I realized that, I was like, oh yeah, subscription libraries often cater to a more niche audience. Anyway, I found this really fascinating. It talked about how monks preserved manuscripts, but of course only the manuscripts that were mainly of interest to them, how the printing press shook everything up and made owning a library collection kind of passé and common. Many more people could afford books than just the elite. About the rise of public libraries and then the balance of wanting to provide books of moral instruction and learning to the public, where the public just wanted like detective novels and romance fiction. You may have gathered by now, if you've stuck around this channel, that I am a massive library nerd, and I had so much fun with this book. And that is a non-fiction reading little moment that I had there. I'm so pleased to have read 2 books that I bought for Christmas. I say I bought. I did buy them, but of course they were gifts from my family. I'm so pleased to have read them and that they lived up to my expectation. Please recommend me non-fiction books, because I'm really having a moment where I just want to put knowledge in my brain and I'm loving it. Also, I've linked my Amazon wishlist below. There's like so much non-fiction on there in my little niche interest areas for you to have a look at. And I will see you next time. Bye.